lives, there's going to be something bad that's going to go down. And I'm pretty sure that all of you are old enough for something like that to have happened by now. Why this happens, we don't really know. Some of the greatest theologians out there debate why these things happen. But as J-Rock said last week, there's nothing you can do, but what you do is all that matters. And when these things happen, God is going to call on you to do something. Sometimes obeying God's call to do something isn't just about obedience to Him, but about learning something that you're going to need to prosper. I want to talk to you guys tonight about various points from the life of David. And all of these are going to come out of the first and second book of Samuel. It's fairly early on in the Bible if you're looking for it at any time. To give you some background, David is considered the greatest king that Israel ever had. He is called a man who is after God's own heart. David is the psalmist. He wrote most of the book of Psalms. And he is the one person in the Bible who is most in tune, not only with what God wanted for him, but what God wanted for the entire Jewish nation. But David is not the first king of Israel. The first king of Israel was actually a man named Saul. This is an actual picture. I found this. Just kidding. The man in the robes there is Samuel. Samuel is the prophet. Now the thing about the prophet is essentially God's voice. When Samuel speaks, it's as if God himself is speaking. And it was the prophet who gets the word from God who to anoint as king. And so what Samuel does is he gets the word, you're going to anoint Saul, and he fills up his flask. Some things say it's a horn, like they use a sheep or a ram's horn. Fill it with oil, and then they pour it over the head. And there's a lot of reasons why that happens. But basically, this is how you became a king in ancient Israel. Saul's pretty much what you would expect from a king. He was tall, he was handsome, he was a good military leader, and he's everything they could ask for until he stopped being those things. Saul eventually began to attribute his successes not to himself, or not to God, but to himself. And of course, this began to anger God. He began to be disobedient towards God. And he even started displaying behaviors that some people today would diagnose as like paranoia or schizophrenia. I mean, he really goes off the deep end. Because of Saul's disobedience, God rejects him. And God tells the prophet Samuel that he even regrets appointing Saul. He says, I'm kicking Saul out. And Samuel he confronts Saul in chapter 15. And Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to someone else, one who is better to you. Now Samuel was the one who appointed Saul as king, but Saul is still the king. And this is the guy who is in charge of all the military. And he is not ready to give up his post. And so while Samuel knows what's supposed to happen, as you can understand, he's probably a little fearful for his life right now. Because like I said, Saul's not just giving up that role because Samuel came along and said so. And so at the beginning of chapter 16, we see something else. The Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as the king over Israel? Fill your flask with olive oil and go to Bethlehem. Find a man named Jesse who lives there, for I have selected one of his sons to be my new king. Who's he going to find? Somebody said it. Who was it? There you go. That's right, David. He's going to find David. So what we see here is that Samuel's not just afraid, but he's in mourning. Kind of a weird thing to have. But Samuel is somewhat justified in his mourning of Saul. He spent a lot of time on Saul. It wasn't just like they anointed Saul and boom, Saul was king. He knew what to do. Samuel had to work with him. He had to, pour himself into him. He worked with him. Have any of you worked with somebody a lot, or have you ever worked on a project a lot, and at at some point you realize it's going to fail. It's just not going to work out. How excited are you when you have to say, I'm done with this. I'm not doing this anymore. And that's kind of where Samuel is. A couple weeks ago, Joe listed his top 5 most annoying Facebook posts. And I'm going to add one to it. And it's what I'm going to call the attention-seeking post. Number 1, I can't believe that just happened. What is wrong with people? Next one. Ugh! I want to scream every time that person does that thing. But I'm going to keep this as vague as possible so nobody actually knows who I'm talking about and I can deny it later. Next one. I'm so sick of Facebook, I'm done. Hit up my cell if you need me. Seriously, you're telling Facebook that you're done with Facebook? And then what do we see? A week later, they're right back on Facebook. And then the last one, the reason this one has quotes is I actually pulled this off of an actual person on my Facebook who basically I see this about 5-6 times a week out of her. So sick of helping people out, and then when I need help, those people disappear. Frustrated beyond belief. That's a fairly mild one. I only went back a week. It goes much, much worse. Honestly, who are you helping with these posts? I'm not saying that you should be putting somebody on blast on Facebook, but doing this is just as bad, and you're not doing anyone any good. And we all have those people on our Facebook. We all have those people that are just like constant drama and want that attention. And when I see that, I kind of want to ask the same question that God asked Samuel. How long will you mourn? How long are you going to stay stuck in the past? How long are you going to whine and complain about a situation that you can't do anything about? Samuel can't redeem Saul. God has already rejected him. You can't get that person to undo those actions that hurt you. You can't undo your actions that hurt someone else or got you into trouble. And you can't make that guy or that girl that you've had that crush on for so long fall in love with you. So how long are you going to continue to make yourself feel miserable, annoy those around you, before you realize that the best thing you can do is move on? Now, God doesn't say you can't mourn. If you look at the verse again, he basically says, why are you still mourning? Fill up your flask, find Jesse, and anoint the new king. There's a time and a place for it, but at a certain point, you have to stop what you're doing and move on. Now, much later in David's life, we actually see him kind of show this pretty well. And it actually happens at what is universally agreed to be the worst time and the worst thing David ever did in his life. We jump ahead to the second book of Samuel, chapter 11. And it's when you read stuff like this that you kind of realize that soap operas have got nothing on the Bibles, guys. If you ever think the Bible is boring, there is some crazy stuff that goes down in the Bible. Basically, this is a time where David's a bit older. He's middle-aged at this point, and he should be out to battle with his men, but he stays back. And in staying back, he ends up having an affair with the wife of one of his top generals. On top of that, he gets her pregnant. So, what does he do? Does he fess up to it? No! He calls the husband home and tries to get the husband, his name's Uriah, to sleep with his wife to cover up who got who pregnant. But Uriah, he's an honorable guy. He's in tune with what God wants. And basically, if you were at battle during this time, you didn't come home and, have relations with your family. You were at battle, that's what you're focusing on. And Uriah's like, my men are still out there, so I might as well be out there. He leaves. So now David's in trouble. Uriah is going to know he's not this kid's father. So he sends word, put Uriah on the front lines of battle, and then he basically tells all his other generals, pull back, leaving Uriah hung out to dry, and he gets killed. Now, nobody is around to question who got Bathsheba pregnant, but God knows what happened. And he actually sends the current prophet, who's now named Nathan, to rebuke David. There's actually a very interesting exchange between Nathan and David. But essentially we get to this point where Nathan says, this is what you've done. We know exactly what you did. You're not going to die. But the child will die. I mean, if you read that, you have so utterly scorned the Lord that the child who is born to you shall die. Adultery, lying, and murder. God's forgiving, but there's consequences. And with great power, there comes a lot more consequences. David is distraught. He pleads with God. He stops eating. He's fasting. He lays on the ground. It doesn't say this, but when a lot of people mourn, they actually wear like sackcloth and cover themselves in ashes. And so David does this the entire time. And eventually, he sees some of his helpers that are around him. They start talking and whispering. And he knows something's up. And so he goes to them and he says, is the baby dead? And they say, yes, the baby's died. And so we'd expect to see a lot of things, but we see this. Then David got up from the ground. He washed himself, put on lotions, and changed his clothes. He went to the tabernacle, worshiped the Lord. After that, he returned to the palace, and was served food and ate. Anybody else think that's kind of weird? Basically, all his helpers are thinking the same thing. You've just been, weeping and fasting and doing all this stuff. Why are you now going back to normal? And he gives them this response. But why? David replied, I fasted and I wept while the child was alive. For I said, perhaps the Lord will be gracious to me and let the child live. But why should I fast when he is dead? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him one day, but he cannot return to me. Pastor Rick Warren of Saddleback Church lost his son to suicide. He battled mental illness for quite some time. And at a certain point, after taking time off, he was beginning to write again and begin to prepare to preach again. And he actually said, I'm not really ready, but I know I'm supposed to. And he gives this quote about the situation. Moving on doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you know you can't change it. You don't have to stop mourning to start moving. What if Samuel hadn't moved on? What if he had never gone and found Jesse and anointed David? What if Rick Warren had never moved on? This guy's on the cover of Time magazine for a reason. He's the author of the #1 selling nonfiction book of all time. And he has more people as members of his church than there are people in Galesburg. What if you never move on from your situation? I'm not saying that you're going to have the same impact in life as David did or that Rick Warren does, but it doesn't mean that it's any less important to God. Now I want to look at one other thing. I'll say this. If you continue to stay stuck in what was or what could have been, you'll miss what is, and you'll never get to see what can be. It's one other story in David's life I want to look at. Now, this is a point when he's running from Saul. He's probably, I guess, in his 20s. Saul knows that he's supposed to be the next king. Okay, this is the middle of everything we've talked about so far. And since Saul knows he's supposed to be the king, what are you going to do? Well, you got to kill the guy. You got to try and take the job, right? That's how you rolled back then. And you can read it. They basically go back to their town of Ziklag. You guys don't need to memorize that. It's going to be on the test later. They go back to their town of Ziklag, and they find that it's been burned down. Their wives, their children have been taken, and pretty much all like their treasure, everything is gone. And if you actually read that last verse there, they raised their voices and they wept until they had no more strength to weep. Have you ever cried so much that you can't cry anymore? Have you ever been so distraught over a situation that you literally can't cry any longer? I haven't, luckily, experienced something so horrible. But what do you think happens next? What do you think David does at this point? Everything's been taken from him. Everything he owns, everything he's loved. What's a guy do? Any guesses? Right? Dude, that is the best answer right there. It's exactly what he does. He doesn't run away. He could have. Because honestly, you look at the next few verses, I don't have them up there, but one of the things you first read is the men are talking about stoning him. They've been fighting for him all this time, so who are they going to blame when all their stuff gets taken? Kill the leader. He doesn't just run up and jump up and, let's go right after him. He calls for the priest, he calls for the special garments, and he says, Lord, will I overtake them? Will I be successful? And God says yes. And to make the long story short, basically they go ahead and they get everything back. Sometimes in life, God is going to say that you need to move on. But sometimes God is going to say, you're going to have to fight for this one. When God gives you something that you truly want, that truly belongs to you, no one can take that away. Now you might be thinking, if they're just going to get it back, well, why didn't God just, keep the Amalekites from going in? Sometimes God needs to show you his redeeming power. And sometimes he wants you to show your obedience, and sometimes you have something to learn. Most of you probably know Jim Carrey. You got that? There you go. I love Jim Carrey. I really do. Jim Carrey grew up in Canada, and for a long time he was homeless. He and his family were actually janitors, and they would live out of their car. But he knew from a very early age what he wanted to do. And so at one point in his life, he actually wrote a check to himself for $10 million for acting services rendered, saying that one day he would, start a movie and get paid $10 million, and then he could cash that check to himself. It was a goal. Now, he didn't become a millionaire just by writing that check. That's not how it works. After years of hard work, eventually he made the movie Dumber and Dumber. You guys know that one? And sure enough, guess what amount he was able to command for that role? $10 million. If you stop when things get hard or when problems arise, you're never going to get to experience your greatest victories. Jim Carrey had to go through 12 bad movies over like 10 years before he had a hit movie. And then it was another 2 movies before he actually accomplished that goal that he had set all those years earlier. When David went out after those men, he took 600 men with him. 200 of them quit because the journey was so hard. The land was so barren, they didn't have the food. They gave up on all their hopes and dreams. But had they gone just a little bit further, they would have gotten everything that was theirs. There's one thing that the Bible shows us over and over. It's our greatest mistakes become their greatest hands. The Israelites ended up with this unfaithful tyrant of a king, and eventually they got David, their greatest ruler. The disciples watched as Jesus was beaten and crucified, only to see him resurrected 3 days later. God wants you to have success, but he's going to ask you to do something. Why don't you guys pray with me?